Undetected is a game that should appeal to me way more than it actually does. I mean, look at it. It wears this Metal Gear Solid influence on its sleeve, and it goes out of its way to painstakingly recreate an experience that mirrors the source material so much that you could probably create a drinking game out of just how many tropes it apes from it. And yet, I don't love this game. It's okay, but after getting through to what I assume is the halfway mark based on the achievements list on Steam, I just don't have much desire to see it through to the end. Undetected is a game that, while competent, it falls just short in all of the ways I personally feel would have better benefited this as a Metal Gear Solid-esque stealth game, rather than what feels more like a streamlined and simplistic take on a venerable and familiar franchise. I suppose that some will think I may be criticizing it a bit harshly. After all, Undetected is a one-man indie title and it's priced accordingly. But the issue is that I see a huge amount of potential here and very little of it has actually been fulfilled by the game's systems. I feel it could have been the MGS equivalent of Stardew Valley to Harvest Moon, but it just doesn't do enough to manage and refine that source material in the same way. And that ultimately leaves me wanting more. Again, it's not that Undetected is a bad game, but rather it doesn't add anything interesting to the existing template, which begs the question of why does it exist and who is this for? At first glance, Undetected looks and feels just about exactly how you would expect it to, but you'll quickly notice that it takes a much more linear approach to its stealth action gameplay. And I don't necessarily mean that in terms of actual story beats or even map layouts, but rather the very gameplay mechanisms that it implements. You have your standard attack combo and your ability to dodge roll. You've got a first-person view and a really cool scouting mechanic that reminds me of the way that the binoculars worked in the original Metal Gear. But that's pretty much where the similarities end gameplay-wise. The basic functions that you're expecting to be able to do, things like crouching for example, aren't actually implemented in the game and you're not actually able to do them. The only time you're actually able to crouch in this game, for instance, is when you wander into this tall grass right over here. And after which, you'll just get back right on your feet when you leave. Every instinct in my body wants to be able to crawl after crouching, but I can't do that. I can't pick up bodies and hide them. I don't have the option to kill any enemies, just knock them out. And even then, only with specific bullets that you can only get later on. The basic rubber bullets that you start with are only useful for flipping switches at a distance and causing distractions. That's not to say that Undetected doesn't give you the tools you need to engage in some true stealth action. It absolutely does. However, their diversity and utility don't surpass those of Metal Gear Solid's, and our hero feels even more limited in what he can do as a result. They work fine, some of them are even fun, but none of them are exactly what I would call interesting. There are a couple of different grenades that cause distractions, but they only really change in terms of their cosmetics. There's no functional difference, for example, between the sexy dance grenade and the scary monster grenade, beyond the hologram animation that plays. Others are more practical, like this one with the barking dog that draws enemies to it, or the stink bomb which chokes enemies with gas and blocks their vision, which allows you to escape. Everything else just seems to be a variation on these different themes. It really does feel like it embodies the "we have Metal Gear at home" meme, simply because it lacks all the tactical depth that I would want from a game in this style. This problem is further exacerbated by Undetected's incessant need to continually create set pieces that seemingly only exist within the game because they're callbacks to Metal Gear Solid. It tries very hard to emulate aspects of MGS without offering the same sort of gameplay functions that make those set pieces work in the first place, making their inclusion in Undetected frivolous window dressing at best. This minefield here, for example. It's a clear nod to all the minefields found in almost every single game in the Metal Gear franchise, but rather than being an actual obstacle that you overcome using careful maneuvers and gadgets, this is merely a jaunt through the woods, mechanically speaking. All you need to do is slowly walk around the mines as you make your way to the end of a maze. The fact that these mines are always visible and the biggest danger are just the patterns that they're laid in is more of an annoyance than a threat. The same goes with these rotating laser beams, again a reference to Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2. While they functionally serve a similar purpose in triggering an alarm, the fact is that, again, you don't need any equipment to deal with them, and it makes their inclusion little more than a callback to fans. This is compounded by the fact that alerts are utterly meaningless and undetected. Unlike the Metal Gear games, alerts end immediately when you exit a room. Enemies will only chase you as far as the room's boundaries and they're isolated to the map that you're currently on. There are no reinforcements either, save for the enemies that are already positioned on the map. An easy way to exploit this is to just rush outside of the room, go into the hallway, and then re-enter. Everything will be reset back to where it was, including any guards that you may have knocked out. The decision to implement such a system is even more puzzling when you stop to consider the fact that this game doesn't even offer any hiding spots. While you do have some gear that lets you avoid enemies, there are no actual places for you to sneak into while you wait for the alert timer to end and for the guards to return to their posts. All you can really do is circle around the map and find some shadows to crouch, stand in and wait. But that's not actually a substitute for having actual hiding spots in a stealth game. Even if you are almost completely invisible in the shadows and in this tall grass, the enemies still can't see you even if you're 5 feet in front of them and they're staring right at you. Though I will say I do find it humorous that this is at least attempted to be explained away in a cutscene.
Have you seen the new G16?
Yeah, it looks like they modified the lenses. Hopefully it's better than these stupid helmets.
Can't see shit.
And I also do want to say that I enjoy the use of the main character's tattoo as an indication of whether or not you're currently hidden in darkness or not. You see, the tattoo glows when you're undetectable, which does compensate for the lack of enemy vision cones. And while this doesn't bother me too much personally as much as my other gripes with the game, I do think that the lack of any sort of minimap system doesn't help any of these issues either, especially when you consider how similar some of these maps actually are, especially in that opening section. You follow them in a loop pattern, but even then, it's very easy to get turned around and lose your bearings. While you do have that scouting ability that I mentioned before, it doesn't compensate for the fact that you're going to be wandering around in areas that look samey, and it can be pretty easy to lose your sense of direction. Although I could really go without that slowdown that's incorporated when using that scouting feature, or even the first-person aiming, I hate it when games, especially stealth games, have a mechanic that forcibly slows down time every time you try to get your bearings and plan your next move. As it stands, Undetected really feels like a Metal Gear Solid game without the full functionality. It's sort of like playing a demo, but with the feeling that more and more features will be added as it goes, except that this is a full release. Again, Undetected is not a bad game by any stretch. It just doesn't do enough with that established gameplay formula to warrant anything further than a cursory glance. It plays fine, but it's only a shadow of its potential, a shadow of the true successor to the legacy of Metal Gear. While the game does have a good story with enough political thrills to keep the ball rolling, and I do really like the comic book styled cutscenes, and I think that the voice acting is pretty decent for what it is, none of those were ultimately strong enough to keep me hooked into the game. While I can admire its inspiration and its competency in creating a decent stealth game that is conceptually fine, its execution leaves a lot to be desired in my mind. Undetected is a decent tribute to Metal Gear and Metal Gear Solid, it just doesn't do enough to make it anything other than a curiosity rather than something with some serious staying power. I strongly feel you're better off if you have access to a PS3 to just get the Metal Gear Solid Legacy Collection and call it a day. Or even the PC versions of Metal Gear Solid will do in a pinch.